Our speaker today is the Superintendent of Public Instruction, Chris Reykdal. Chris is the first speaker we've had who sat with you all instead of sitting up at the table. and I think that's really appropriate for somebody who cares about education. It reminds me of classrooms and how difficult it was to get students to engage when they were all at the back of the room, unless you kind of got with them. So it's good to have him here. I have like a 3-paragraph introduction of him, but you all know him fairly well, so I'm going to skip most of that introduction and say that you all realize that he has been a state legislator and that he's spent most of his life, as an adult at least, dealing with public education, and that he leads a team that is focused on multiple pathways for a high school graduation beyond the University for All approach, which I know is important to a lot of us as business representatives. So I'm going to end my remarks and let him address you, and then we'll take questions after. Okay.
This is a pretty fun room because I've worked with almost all of you at some point in the last year or two, and honestly, I don't think I'm going to tell you anything you don't already know. So I'll skip the wisdom and philosophy of how that place is going to come together in 6 months to actually solve the budget plan, and get on to a little bit of, 7 months, that was too optimistic, I'm sorry about that. I heard some grumbling and I know they were upset at the quickness of that. So a little bit about what we're doing, because I think it does set a little bit of framework for you, particularly as you are working with clients or organizations that you are direct employed with, to help them understand the focus of OSPI and the role that we want to play for public K-12 over the next 4 years, and a little bit of the role that we want to play in supporting the caucuses. And then a very specific ask of you in the end about a policy that I think will help change outcomes for kids that I think you can be a big part of. So briefly, OSPI is 400 employees. We're located down the street here. We're 10.5 or $11 billion in resource that comes through us. And as I've talked to many of you about, I always describe it as the most inspiring hourglass ever. This policy and this money that the legislature supplies, primarily a little bit of federal money, gets to the top of this hourglass and it necks its way down to this narrow point, and that's us. We have to send resources to districts in an equitable way that tries to create as much student achievement and accountability, but also flexibility for districts. Many of you know me from my role in the Community and Technical College Board, where I was for 14 years. It's the same role that I had there, that balance between getting policymakers their wants, but getting local communities enough flexibility that they can deliver programs that make sense to them. What Yakima needs will be very different than what Mercer Island needs. And so that's OSPI, this money and this policy next through us, and it goes out to the districts, 295 of them, and then we flip that thing upside down every year. And what needs to come back from the districts is student achievement and accountability and data and expectation that they did something very powerful with those resources so that it can connect back through our research and data team. And then we go back to the legislature with, these are the results. This is where you're getting good value for your investment, and this is where we think practice isn't really working very well. We're going to get a hell of a lot better at OSPI on that research side, because we have a ton of people and data there that are very, very good. We aren't exactly asking some of the most important research questions about ROI. Are we getting the best bang for our buck in certain programs in certain areas? And if we thought we could do better, what would that look like from a policy framework? And so I tease our team a little bit, and I'm really just absolutely inspired by how much talent there is there. But I tease them a little bit that this budget I walked into for my predecessor is quite literally every single division got 1 or 2 things to ask for, which is not a strategic vision at all about budgeting. It should be a function, when you request additional resources, it should be a function of your goals and your policy framework to achieve your goals. And so you're going to see us spend a lot of energy on what we call performance indicators. We just released one yesterday, a very powerful notion, and that's 9th grade failure rate. It is statistically one of the most powerful measures you can look at to determine whether a student will graduate or graduate on time. And so we're going to start lining up our policy and budget requests with the things that actually make a difference for students. And you'll see that very much out of the gate next session in a small supplemental, and then for the full biennial next time. Again, I won't spend a ton of time on the Hill. You know what's going on. You know the construct. You know the framework. You know where both sides are and how they have to find victory in that. I will say that our organization is working very hard to get 4 caucuses what they need. At the end of the day, we all know this, that it's a 4 caucus solution. There's no such thing in a McCleary world. So there's no scenario where litigation brings you to a place where 25 Republicans in the Senate join 50 Democrats in the House and find happy. I mean, that's just not going to happen. And so we actually believe it's our role to make sure that whoever has a big idea or a big concept, whether it be a narrow policy aspect to K-12 and workforce development or a big idea on tax, we're trying to share with them what we think are the impacts to school districts and how it may or may not create more student achievement. Their job, as you all know from being there a long time, and me for 6 years in the caucus and 20 years on the Hill in some capacity, I know they have to find victory ideologically in the ultimate solution, enough to get a few votes from every caucus. Our job is to put everything through an education filter. That's fine that you don't want to raise taxes. Don't, if that's your thing. And we'll tell you whether that can still create student achievement. That's fine that you want to do something different with CTE or testing or counseling or something else. We'll tell you whether we think that brings results. So that leads me to a couple things that I think you all should care deeply about. We announced our graduation rates yesterday for the prior year's cohort. And the good news story is we hit an all-time high again, 79.1% if you look at overall students. Unfortunately, the gap between poverty and non-poverty is still about 20%. And we still have big gaps in students of color and tribal students and all kinds of subsets. But every single category improved over 1 year. The biggest growth being homeless youth, which is very exciting because this legislature has specifically put dollars into homelessness programs so that the school districts take greater responsibility for outcomes. And lo and behold, we jumped 10 points in graduation rates in just a couple years with these students. So this stuff really matters to us. The challenge that I'm posing for 4 caucuses right now that I think the business community in particular should care a lot about is our want for objective standard measures, standardized tests, are absolutely valid, particularly when they're aligned with standards so that we're measuring the progress and the effectiveness of our systems. They actually aren't very valid if you're trying to make a lifetime determination for a kid by putting their entire graduation fate on one test. And you're living in a state right now that is down to 4. There are 4 states that still use a high-stakes exit exam to determine whether a student will get a high school diploma. There are 3 other states in current practice, and ours will join them if today's sophomores continue to be held to this law that is in place. The other states have assessments, and they measure district progress and everything else. They have end-of-course exams, which we have and are sort of phasing out, but they make graduation a function of student effort and rigorous coursework that leads to a pathway of success, whether that's 4-year programs, 2-year programs, apprenticeships, straight to work, you name it. They're beating us, in my opinion, on building out pathways. And even though we're making great progress in student achievement in this state, it is going to get very expensive as that yield curve tries to capture the last 20% of students through the exact same knothole. So my kids love math and science, and they love standardized tests, and they're going to rock it, and the cost of my students not going to be a whole lot to get them through the system. But the student who loves to fabricate and loves to build and loves to put something together, who needs a CTE course, they're going to need additional resources. But if we continue to link a high-stakes exit exam to their graduation, every counselor, every coach, every parent is going to say which gets you the quickest pathway to the test with effectiveness. And it's traditional college math sequences and it's traditional college English language arts sequences. So you're telling 21% of students who are struggling with lots of things, you need to look just like the valedictorian that's headed to the UW. And it's not working. It's not working. So we're closing gaps because we put enormous energy on this. But imagine a world in which we say to the student, we still need to assess you because we've got to measure our progress. We've got to have accountability. We have an achievement index. We want to focus on results. And we want to use your test results to bring you a program of study that makes sense for you based on where you think you're going. But if we can't de-link the test, and I'm asking you to take this very seriously, few students will say, despite my passion for CTE, career in tech, and despite my passion for work-ready skills, my counselors tell me I got to do Algebra 1, Geometry, Algebra 2 to have a shot at that test. So I'm going to sit in my 30-to-1 student-faculty ratio class, slog away with quadratic equations, and I'm going to do my best on a test. And if I don't pass it, apparently my alternative is to prep for another test or a collection of evidence class where I build a portfolio. In the meantime, there's some small business owner in Sumner going, why the hell did this student graduate with 4 attempts at a test and they don't have common sense skills for my customers? So delinking is a powerful tool to actually bring in CTE pathways. We can still have accountability, but we can be like 46 other states that say we're going to use tests to measure district progress and state progress, but we're going to start putting pathways in front of kids that they care deeply about. They get our business community the workforce they need. Last year we graduated over 1,500 additional students. $560 million in lifetime income for just those 1,500 students because we got them over the hurdle. Another $400 million in deferred taxpayer costs because they're not going to sit in the criminal justice system or the social safety net forever. Last year's 1% gain in graduation was a $1 billion decision for the state of Washington. $1 billion. And I am convinced it's because we put interventions in front of students in relentless ways and more counseling and more advising, not because we told them, y'all got to get to calculus, because they didn't get there. They used alternative pathways to be successful. So this is a challenge. I've been talking to a lot of your members, and I mean your business members as well as policymakers. Everyone cognitively gets it, but everyone's afraid. Everyone's afraid they're going to jump off that cliff without the test, and they're not sure their parachute's going to open. And we spent 10 or 20 years building this concept that you must get to a test, and so the round table is really nervous, right? But I would argue that the round table has the luxury of seeking 80,000 Washington kids for computer sciences degrees because they want them to compete against about 100 million kids in China and India and Russia that are seeking computer sciences degrees. So I totally get why they're pushing that agenda. But in the meantime, the trust manufacturer in Tumwater needs somebody who can just get to work right now, work their ass off, understand what a customer is, do something with their hands, and add productivity value. And that's not going to come from calculus for everybody. So that's my plea to you. I need AWB to step up and to help us work with Senate Republicans in particular to say, we want accountability, we want assessments, we want standards, we'll even work on meaningful alternatives if you want students to take the test. But if you're going to keep linking, we're not going to be able to open up CT pathways. It's that simple. And it's that honest. That's all I want. That's all I want, Mark. That's it. No. And $3.5 billion. Any questions?